Eugene Halbert is a 44-year-old pediatric nurse in Goldsboro, North Carolina. He has spent 16 years holding the hands of frightened children, sitting with shattered parents at 2 in the morning, and showing up for strangers on holidays when he couldn't show up for his own daughter. He is not a flashy man. He drives a 7-year-old truck. He lives in an apartment off Berkeley Boulevard that faces another apartment building. He is not the kind of man who books surprise trips to Nashville or takes his family to beach houses with rooftop decks. And one October afternoon, his 14-year-old daughter looked him dead in the eyes and told him that her stepfather was more of a man than he would ever be. She said it loud, deliberate, the way teenagers say things when they want to make absolutely certain the knife goes all the way in. "You're a failure, Dad. Kyle isn't like you. I wish he was my real father." Eugene didn't yell. He didn't cry. He stood in his kitchen holding a dish towel, and he made a decision he knew would change everything. He gave his daughter exactly what she asked for. And 24 hours later, his ex-wife was calling him in a panic he hadn't heard in her voice since their marriage collapsed. Eugene and Diane had married young, had their daughter Ree 2 years in, and shared the kind of life that looks fine from the outside. But nursing is not a 9-to-5 job. The hours are brutal, the emotional weight is crushing, and there were long stretches where Eugene came home too empty to be the husband Diane needed. They didn't fight. That was almost the problem. They just slowly stopped being in the same marriage. By the time Ree was 7, they had separated. The divorce was final, 8 months later. Eugene accepted a custody arrangement that gave Diane the school weeks and left him with alternating weekends and split holidays, because he believed stability mattered more than his own calendar. He was wrong about what that stability would cost him. Diane met Kyle Forsythe about a year after the divorce. Commercial real estate, silver Audi, slim-fit suits, restaurants in Raleigh that Eugene couldn't afford without draining his savings. Eugene had a policy about Kyle. No opinion. As long as the man treated Ree well, he was none of Eugene's business. What Eugene didn't anticipate was that Kyle would become the measuring stick against which everything Eugene was would be found insufficient. It started small. Ree came home describing a beach house in Wrightsville Beach, an outdoor shower, a rooftop deck, a seafood restaurant at sunset. Then it was courtside seats at a Hornets game. Then a boat. Then a spontaneous trip to Nashville that Kyle had booked the night before without telling anyone. Eugene said all the right things. He showed up to every pickup, every drop-off, every school talent show. He drove 45 minutes to sit in the third row and film performances on his phone. He did all the things a father does that nobody photographs or talks about at dinner parties, but none of that was the story being told in the other house. Through the clumsy, accidental honesty of teenagers, Eugene learned that Diane had been quietly rewriting their history for years. Not dramatic lies, something more corrosive. The slow replacement of facts with feelings until the feelings become facts. In that version of events, Eugene had been absent, emotionally unavailable, never ambitious enough. He had settled for less and dragged Diane down with him. Ree had been swimming in that water every single day, and by 14, she was soaked through with it. On the first Saturday of October, Ree arrived at Eugene's apartment for the weekend. He had the pizza dough ready, ingredients spread across the counter, a card game waiting, plans for the farmer's market Sunday morning. She sat on the couch and looked at her phone. He gave her space. 40 minutes later, he called her to the kitchen. She leaned against the counter and told him that Kyle had offered to pay for her school trip to Europe. $4,200, just like that, without hesitation. Eugene had already put $300 aside and planned to work extra winter shifts to cover the rest. He told her that was very generous. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you've already decided what you think of them. Then she said it. "You're a nurse." The way she said the word drained every ounce of value from it. "You're always tired. You have this little apartment. Kyle has a real career. He actually succeeded." And then, calmly, deliberately, with full eye contact, "You're a failure, Dad. Kyle isn't like you. I wish he was my real father." Eugene looked at his daughter for a long moment. He said quietly and clearly, All right, Ree. I hear you. I'm going to call your mother, and I want you to think about what you said, because I'm going to honor it. 20 minutes later, Diane's car was in the parking lot. Ree walked out without saying goodbye. Eugene watched from the window. Then he made 3 decisions. The first was about Ree. He stopped chasing. He had been pouring into a container with a hole in the bottom for years, texting, reaching out, sending things she might find interesting, across a distance that kept growing. He didn't disappear, didn't become cruel or cold. He simply stopped initiating. If she wanted to talk, she could call. He was not going to beg his own daughter to want him in her life. The second decision was about Diane. He called his family law attorney and laid out 16 years of documentation, shift records, attendance records, text messages, photographs. His attorney told him what he was describing had a name, parental alienation, and that Eugene's methodical record-keeping was significant. Eugene said he wasn't ready to file anything yet. He wanted to watch what happened first. The third decision was about himself. He called Patricia Denor, the nursing director at Wayne UNC, who had offered him a nurse educator position twice before and been turned down both times. When he called, she laughed before she even said hello. He told her he was ready. They met that afternoon. The new role came with an $18,000 salary increase, better hours, and a clear path to Director of Education within 2 years. He signed the paperwork on Wednesday. 12 days after Ree left his apartment, Diane called on a Sunday evening. Her voice was stripped raw, in a way Eugene hadn't heard since they had sat together in a doctor's office getting news they weren't prepared for. She told him everything. Kyle's commercial real estate company had been under investigation by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for 14 months, accused of fraudulent misrepresentation to investors in a Wake County development project, collectively just under $1.2 million. The investigation had concluded. Criminal referrals were being filed. His license was suspended. A reporter from the Raleigh News and Observer had called Diane's cell phone that Sunday afternoon, asking for comment. That was how she found out. And there was more. Kyle's daughter from his first marriage, the one Ree had described as cool and successful, hadn't spoken to her father in 4 years. Not because she was busy, because Kyle had borrowed her life savings when she was 22 and never paid back a single dollar. Diane had called the number she found in Kyle's phone log. The woman answered and said flatly that she had nothing to say to anyone connected to her father, that he had stolen from her, and that would never change. Ree had heard all of it. She had been sitting right there when the reporter called, right there when Diane spoke to Brittany, and she had been in her room for 3 days since, barely eating, not talking, asking only one thing, over and over, "Why didn't you tell me the truth about Dad?" Diane's voice cracked. She told Eugene that Ree had asked her directly whether Eugene had worked nights so they could have health insurance, whether he had been at her school events, whether he had paid child support consistently, and Diane had said yes to all of it. And Ree had cried for an hour. Then Diane said the hardest thing she had ever said to him. "I think she's been told things that weren't fair to you, and I think I'm the one who told them." Eugene let the silence hold. Then he said he wasn't angry, wasn't going to use it against her. He just wanted to talk to his daughter. He drove to Diane's house the next evening. She met him at the door, looking like she hadn't slept in days, and for the first time in 6 years, she stepped aside to let him in. Ree's room was down the hall. She opened the door when Diane knocked, and she looked smaller than Eugene remembered. Sweatpants, puffy eyes, and pressed against her chest was a stuffed brown bear named Biscuit that he had bought her at a gas station during a road trip when she was 4 years old and couldn't sleep. He sat in her desk chair. She sat on her bed with her knees pulled up. They were quiet for a while. Then she said, "Dad, I said something really bad." He said, "You did." She said she didn't mean it. He said he knew, but that she had said it, and they had to be honest about that. Then he told her something she didn't know. When she was 3 years old, she had spiked a 104-degree fever in the middle of the night. They drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning, and she had burned through the whole ride calling for him. The nurses let him hold her for 4 hours straight. That was the night he decided to go back to school for nursing. He had watched what those nurses did, how steady they were, how they held the room together when everything was falling apart, and he knew that was what he wanted to be. She was crying silently now. He told her he had chosen a job that didn't pay as much as some others, and he would make that same choice again, not because money didn't matter, but because the work was real and important, and he was good at it. And then he said the words he needed her to hear more than anything else. I am not a failure. I need my daughter to know who I actually am, instead of who somebody else told her I was. Ree put her face in her hands. Eugene moved to the edge of the bed and put his arm around her, and she leaned into him the way she used to when she was small, when the world was too big and he was the safest thing in it. They stayed that way for a long time. Before he left, he told her one more thing she didn't know. A savings account he had been quietly building since she was 7, never mentioned, never used for leverage, designed to cover 2 years of in-state tuition by the time she turned 18. She stared at him. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked. Because you didn't need to know yet, he said. You were a kid. That was my job, not yours. In the months that followed, they started over. Not perfectly. There were setbacks and hard conversations, and days when she was somewhere else entirely. But she started calling, started asking real questions about his work, about what his days looked like, about who he had been when he was her age. He answered everything honestly, including the uncomfortable parts. Kyle Forsythe pled no contest to 3 counts of fraudulent misrepresentation the following March, received 18 months of supervised probation, was ordered to pay restitution, and was permanently barred from holding a real estate license in North Carolina. Diane had ended the relationship the week the story ran. Eugene felt no satisfaction. He felt tired and sad, and most of all he felt clear, the way you feel when something you've sensed for years finally comes into focus. He moved into a 3-bedroom house on Royal Avenue in January. Wide porch, backyard, a fig tree, a neighborhood where people sat outside on warm evenings. Ree helped him paint the spare room a deep green she said looked like the inside of a forest. Somewhere in the middle of the second wall, she started telling him about a boy at school, a complicated situation with her best friend, social geometry he didn't entirely follow, but listened to very carefully. He realized they hadn't talked like that in years. He didn't say so out loud. He just listened. Patricia Denore confirmed in April that he was being formally considered for Director of Nursing Education. He told Ree over tacos at the kitchen table, her feet tucked up under her on the chair, the way she'd always sat since she was small. She looked up from her plate and said quietly, "Seriously, I'm really proud of you, Dad." 3 words he had waited 14 years to hear. They arrived tucked inside a Tuesday evening, like the most ordinary thing in the world. He said thank you. He asked if she wanted more salsa. She said yes. Eugene's mother told him something when he was 9 years old, when a kid at school had convinced everyone he was lying about something completely true. She sat him down and said, "Eugene, you cannot chase people toward the truth. You can only live it long enough that they can't avoid it." He has thought about that a lot lately. He thinks she was right. His daughter called him last Thursday to ask if she could come over Saturday to help replant the fig tree. The roots have gotten too established for the spot it's in. She said she was going to research the best transplanting technique so they didn't kill it. He said that sounded perfect. She said she'd be there at 10. She was there at 5 minutes to.